Welcome to Expert Delphi Part 1 webinar. My name is Paweł. I'm working as sales consultant at Embarcadero, and today I have a pleasure to demonstrate the first part of the review of my recently published Expert Delphi book. So this book has been published just 2 months ago, and it's all about doing mobile development with Delphi. So the main title line and the main topic of this book is really how to become a developer superhero. When I'm talking to developers using other programming languages, other environments, a typical requirement is to have a mobile application for two most popular platforms, which is iOS and Android. And yeah, there are certain technologies that allows you to target both platforms from the same code base, but they are typically are either not native, so they don't have a full power, full access to the underlying operating system and hardware. So basically Delphi is an example and the leading platform for a solution that gives you all the best from the technology. So you have just one code base, you can use reusable components, and you can target from the same source code all the supported platforms. So this book is specifically about building mobile applications using a FireMonkey framework and targeting iOS and Android from the same code base. So that's very important, and this book is not about VCL development. There are many other resources in the internet you can find, and the VCL or Visual Component Library was around for many years and is still probably the best framework, best library if you want to target Windows only. But if you want to target multiple platforms, specifically mobile platforms, then FireMonkey is probably the best solution. And not only is about the native compilers, but also about using reusable components. So with Delphi, especially also in the FireMonkey framework, you have hundreds of pre-built reusable components that come with a source code, so you can have a look under the hood how those things are implemented, and you can start and extend some of the existing components. But also you have access to the all kinds of services. So there is an HTTP client component that is a basis of many other more specialized components that make it possible to communicate with all kinds of REST services, backend as a service services, traditional SOAP services, but also FireDuck library for communicating with databases. Another interesting option for Delphi is integrating with the emerging world of the Internet of Things. So many developers and architects, analysts agree that the Internet of Things is the next big thing, but there is hardly any dominating company or standard, so it's such an interesting environment. So this book that I'm going to talk about today, and also in 2 days on Thursday, is organized into 12 chapters. So today I'm going to focus on the contents of the first 6 chapters, and in 2 days about the remaining 6 chapters. So why this book, and why I decided to write it? I've been working with Delphi and before Delphi with Turbo Pascal for more than 20 years, and since 2001, when the current version of Delphi was Delphi 5, I moved from Poland to the Netherlands, and joined Borland and started to work for a professional services organization as trainer and consultant. And over time the names of the companies have been changing. So it was Borland, and Borland split it into Borland and Codegear, and Codegear has been acquired by Embarcadero. Embarcadero has been acquired by the Idera. So regardless these organizational changes, I've been working and presenting Delphi on many conferences, on many trainings. So over time there were many different demos, different technologies, different knowledge that I didn't want to lose. So roughly a year ago, during the summer holiday, I was walking through the Polish mountains with my son, and I had this idea that I really want to write a book, and I had this concept of really covering the whole spectrum of Delphi. So if you look into these contents, the main thing was to focus on the new technologies. So there are two main visual frameworks in Delphi. There is VCL and FireMonkey. So most of the existing Delphi developers know VCL inside out. So from the perspective of learning something new and something that is more relevant to the new development, to mobile development, IoT development, integrating with the cloud, I decided to focus on the FireMonkey and specifically on mobile targets. So in this book you will only see applications or apps targeting Android and iOS, even though with FireMonkey you can also target Windows, you can also target Mac OS, and if you use an FMX Linux, which is a third-party add-on, you can also build user interfaces for Linux. But in this book I decided to focus on user interfaces on FireMonkey. But if you look at the contents of this book, I tried to really cover this from the very beginning to the very end. So when you are about to sign the agreement to write a book, the very first thing you need to do, and probably the most important thing to do, is to actually decide on the contents of the book and have a description and the logical flow, what goes into each chapter, how long will be each chapter, and how long you are estimating to take to write a chapter. So if you look at the names of the different chapters, the first chapter is Fasten Your Seatbelts, and it's very much about the IDE. So if you want to do a mobile development, you want to first of all you need to decide which version of Delphi you want to use, and after you install Delphi, you need to do a certain one-time preparation to prepare the IDE for the Android and iOS development. So in the first chapter I'm basically covering the process of getting Delphi, installing Delphi, building a hello world one button app, and successfully deploying it to Android and iOS device. So that's the preparation, and then I'm going into the language. So the Mind Your Language is relatively a big chapter covering Object Pascal language, which is the basis of Delphi. And this book is not really intended for people that are completely new to Delphi. So the typical profile or a profile of a person that I'm expecting to read the book is an existing Delphi developer that probably have been using Delphi for building Windows applications, are interested in the latest features that were introduced to Delphi in the a couple of last years. So in the Mind Your Language, I'm doing a little bit of a primer on just to, even for the newcomer, to be able to understand the structure of a Delphi program. But also focusing on some newer Delphi constructs introduced starting from Delphi 2009, like generics, like anonymous methods, and those kind of things, just to be able to understand the source code of FireMonkey better. In the third chapter, before really going into the FireMonkey itself, the packing up your toolbox, I'm talking a little bit more about certain everyday concepts that you want to have when developing applications. So things like parallel programming library. So if your application is not responsive in mobile world, the operating system may think that it's not going to work and will kill it. So so it's very important that if you are doing long-running operations like downloading big files or doing these kind of things, you really want to have your application using multi-threading. So parallel programming library is important concept. Also things like working with files, working with JSON, working with XML are certain skills that I believe every programmer, every Delphi programmer need to have, and it's very common to deal with JSON and to do something useful with it, like to parse it or to generate it. So this third chapter is really making this foundation for the chapters 4 and 5, which really goes into the playing with FireMonkey and doing the FireMonkey in 3D. So it's primarily about understanding the FireMonkey graphics and how it's possible to write your program once and being able to target different operating systems and different graphics libraries on different operating systems, mobile and desktop. So that's a lot of smaller, practical and funny examples to demonstrate. And at the end of the chapter 4, there is a complete demo, the game of memory demo that anybody can just take and compile and deploy to his or her iOS, Android or desktop operating system and have fun to play. So that's fun. In the 5th chapter in 3D, I'm a big fan of doing 3D. When I was finishing Warsaw University of Technology, my master thesis was in Delphi 1, a 3D visualization project. So FireMonkey is very strong and 3D is very appealing. So you can use FireMonkey to build stunning user interfaces also in 3D. So that goes quite in depth in different options and how you should structure your 3D applications and what are the main concepts to understand. And the 6th chapter is understanding styles. So if you want to build user interfaces with FireMonkey, probably the most important concept to understand is FireMonkey styling. So this chapter goes quite in depth, starting from using a style lookup property to change the look and feel of different controls, using a built-in styles through using custom styles, and then going into customizing existing styles and different options for embedding custom styles in your applications, and also using frames, using inherited views to build mobile interfaces that are specific to certain form factors and orientations. So this is logically the first part of the book, and this is what I'm going to really spend time showing you some of the demos from the book, because book itself has more than 500 pages, so it will be impossible to really cover it in depth in this 45-50 minutes webinars, but just to give you a feeling what it is all about and that it is really interesting to read and maybe become a better developer superhero. So the explanation of the second part of the book I will leave for the webinar, which is part 2 of this webinar. Is more about working with data, about talking to mobile hardware, about extending to the Internet of Things, building web services using RAD server, and practicalities of deploying applications to app stores. Okay, so let's look at the first chapter. So this is just a simple application. When you create a file new multi-device application, you get just a blank two-dimensional form, and you can put just a button on the form, and yeah, with a little bit of code, show message Delphi hello world. And then this application can be, just by changing the target platform, you can compile it on to one of the supported platforms using different compilers. So this is really probably the most important thing about this book, is this plain capability that you create your application once using visual designers, and just by changing the target platform, you effectively changing the compiler and you can compile it for either Windows, which is target platforms for the Delphi environment itself, or recompile it to one of the supported mobile platforms. So the typical workflow, and that's something I'm doing a lot in this book, is that typically you create your application and first you compile it for Windows, because that's the fastest, because Delphi itself is on Windows, and you can see if your application is doing what you want it to do, and then you can switch to other platforms, like for example to iOS. Just by clicking on a run button, you can create a native executable that runs on a given device. So yeah, that's not very interesting in terms of demos, but going to the second chapter. The second chapter is all about different Object Pascal constructs. So we are starting to build a game of memory. So this game of memory is a simple game where you need to find out, actually uncover the pairs of different images and remove them from the board. So it only contains two forms, one main form and one form with a setting. So in this first chapter, I'm going into a bit of a detail of a structure of a FireMonkey forms application, without really working on a game itself, but just to have a form with two application with two forms, and how to lazy create forms, so that you can have forms that are either auto created or forms that can be created when needed in a lazy fashion. And then it goes into different demos of how to use sets. So set is a very specific Object Pascal type that is very useful and something unique as compared to other programming languages, but also some newer constructs like class helpers, generics, operator overloading, anonymous methods, custom attributes, or runtime type library. So understanding of these language constructs are important, because FireMonkey library and Delphi itself comes with the source code. So you spend time trying to understand how the FireMonkey works itself, so understanding these constructs can be very useful in your day-to-day work. So let's move to the third chapter. In this chapter I'm talking about parallel programming library and also working with files, JSON and XML processing. Let's have a look on the parallel programming library demo that comes with the book. So here is a demo that is discussed in quite detail in the book. Contains different constructs and different options to use a parallel programming library. So in parallel programming library, when you want to add multi-threading to your application, you need to add a system.threading unit to the user's clause. This is where all the most important types related to parallel programming are defined. And there are three main things that you can use, three main abstractions. So these are tasks, so you can use tasks for just as a better abstraction for a thread. You can use a parallel loop, so that's something that is demonstrated here. And also you can use futures, which is a specification of a task, which is like a thread, but something that returns a value and which is calculated in a different thread. So yeah, this is also demonstrating one of the concepts of building user interfaces for mobile. So one of the key things is to use to build interfaces in such a way that they will look okay in different form factors, different orientations. So within Delphi you can preview how your form will look under different targets. And here you have an example of a simple form that is using the toolbar with a label that has a special lookup tool label that is aligned to the client, and there are different buttons that are aligned to the top and are using a certain margins. Actually, not in this case, but so regardless of the size of the form, this demo would look okay. But the point is that you can use different constructs. So you can, for example, compare the performance of a typical loop. So you have a do time consuming operation is used quite a lot in here, and it's just sleep, and you specify for how many milliseconds. So we are sleeping for 10 milliseconds 100 times. But you can also do the same loop using the parallel for. So you have an anonymous method that we have learned about in the previous chapter that is taken as a third parameter to the for method of a t-parallel class. I'm running in a virtual machine, so if I would run it, that would be hardly any difference because I'm using only one virtual processor. So depending on how many virtual processors or cores you have, that would be the gain in performance of this application. And also here example of doing non-responsive user interface and responsive user interface. So I can do a time-consuming operation and put my main thread to sleep for 3 seconds. But the better thing is to call the same functionality but from within a task, and you will have a responsive user interface. Also here we have an example how to synchronize with the main thread. So under the hood, the parallel programming library is using regular threads, so you cannot really change things from non-main thread in the user interface, so you need to do synchronize. So here we have the constructs and how you should be doing this. Also, when you define a task, does not mean that it will start. You have a task as and a create method that takes an anonymous method, which is just the functionality to be executed in a separate thread. But then when you call a start task, then it's happening. So here I'm compiling this for Windows 64, but yeah, I can just see that with just one virtual processor, the parallel loop and for parallel and non-parallel loop is almost the same. But here I can see that if I do a non-responsive, I cannot really do anything. But if I do a responsive, during the processing my user interface still reacts to what I'm doing. Also, a very interesting feature is futures. So futures is like a task that returns a value, and here is an example of calculating a certain value but using two different futures. So imagine that you have a company that needs to understand, like for example big bank or an insurance company, and we want to see what is the ratio between the planned expenses and the actual expenses. So calculating both of these things can be a time-consuming operation. So we can either do it just one after another. So we can have a planned, so basically calculating planned expenses takes 1 second and calculating actual expenses takes 2 seconds. So if we do just without a futures, we will have to spend 3 seconds here. And if we are using futures, and that's how we can define it, we can have two different futures, task future, and the future you need to specify as a generic what is a return type of a future, and then you can calculate it, the ratio, but using two different futures. So similarly to tasks, you need to call start for the task to execute, and in case of futures, the moment that you are actually calling them, then they are executed. So here we just define the two futures, but the moment that we try to assign their value in a statement, then they are calculated. The second demo in chapter 3, packing up your toolbox, goes into processing, how to process files, how to process JSON, how to process XML. So this is just again a similar structure. We have just one main form with three different forms that demonstrates working with files, working with JSON, and working with XML. And we can also compile this into Windows, but the point is to be able to also to compile to Android and to the iOS. So there is a one main favorites class. So that's the class. Actually, it's not this one. Here we have just a class. So there is a one favorite, and there is just one URL and a caption with a description. So it's a little program to manage your favorites. So that's a very simple class, and there is also tFavorites class, which is just a tObject lists generic list of tFavorites. And in the main form, we are in the constructor, we are creating an instance of favorites, and we just add two favorites, the Delphi product page and the Delphi docwiki main page as a favorites to manipulate. So this is something that we use in specific subforms that are created. So first we can have a look into the text files. So the objective of this demo is to be familiar with using system.io utils. So on mobile platforms, as opposed to desktop platforms, we cannot really save files to arbitrary locations. So one of the typical things you want to do on mobile development is to save file to the documents folder. So that's the folder that both Android and iOS operating systems make accessible to your application. So you are free to create files and to read files very much like in the normal Windows development. And there are different ways of creating files. So you can use a built-in assign file, reset file, rewrite file, some of the basic file operations that we've been learning like 20 years ago. But There are now more flexible ways of working with files. You can use a TStreamWriter class or TStreamReader class. So we have the system IO utils give us the location of the file to locate. So it is the get documents folder, and this is our file. There is also tpath combine, because on different targets you can have a backslash or forward slash, so tpath combine will accommodate for differences across the platforms. And this is how you can output a file, and also how you can read the file and show the file. So if we compile this application, it will just show you the text file. You can write it, you can read it. It's working okay. So also you have different ways of working with JSON. So starting from Delphi 10 Seattle, we have much better options for working with JSON. So this demo demonstrates working with DOM, so manipulating JSON in memory, or using a JSON text writer, or using a JSON object builder. Also, I'm not going to go into the details, because if I would try to explain every single demo in the book, that will take probably much longer than this webinar is supposed to last. So you can read in the chapter 3 how to work with JSON, use different options of generating JSON, and also how to read JSON. Also in XML we have this is something maybe not as common as JSON nowadays, but still there are situations that you want to be able to process JSON. So on mobile platforms you need to use a specific DOM vendor. So there is a TXML document component that is responsible for parsing XML. There is something called XML data binding that you can use to generate object Pascal code to help you with processing of JSON. So here we have the demo of working with JSON. So you can write JSON, you can read JSON, and also you can work with XML, so you can write XML and read some XML. So yeah, this is I'm very how you say it, passionate about those demos, and it really, writing a book is really a long time thing. It took me almost a year to write these 12 chapters plus preface plus the end of the book. So yeah, in the next chapter I've been going into different ways of working with graphics in a 2D graphics. So in FireMonkey, the main abstraction for working with for doing graphics is Canvas. Canvas is a class that provides certain functionality that is implemented differently across different operating systems. So that's the main block of writing a cross-platform graphics code. So you call different Canvas methods to write lines, to fill rectangles, to specify color, to do all kinds of operations. But when you compile for different platforms, then this code is at the end compiled using different underlying graphics APIs. And in this demo, similarly to the chapter 4, I'm first starting in how you would build a visualization in code. So that's typically what you are supposed to do in other programming languages. So here, if I just compile this code, you can see a beautiful yellow sun on the beautiful sky blue sky, and exactly the same visual result you have when compile this application for iOS or Android. But the point is that first of all, you can make your code a little bit nicer by using the helpers. So from in the chapter 2 we cover how to use helper classes, and here I have a certain helper for a tCanvas class. So your certain code that we were using in the previous example can be put into the helper, so the resulting code to generate the very same sun can be simplified by delegating a certain common functionality into the helper. But at the end, FireMonkey is not about writing this code on such a low level, but we have components. So yeah, there is one more step. So this code gets even more complicated when you switch to animation. When you try to animate, you use a timer component, and here we have some more functionality to move the sun. So if I just now compile this code, now my sun should nicely ascend. But yeah, the point here in the chapter 4 is that for almost everything, and that's a beauty of Delphi and FireMonkey, you have components. So instead of creating this in code, you can use shape components that comes with on the tool palette to add different elements to your applications. So right now I can see the result of my work at design time. So that's one benefit, but the most important benefit is that I just have one rectangle, I have just one circle component, and I have 12 line components that are specifically rotated. So the end result is exactly the same, but the thing is that I have not written any single line of code. So that's some of the things that I wanted to illustrate in this book, that with using components, so not only the FireMonkey is giving you the possibility to cross-compile your application to different platforms, but you can be more productive and become a mobile superhero just by compiling your application using components to create more complicated things. So the same application again can be also you can use animations, and you can use glow effect components. So not only shape components, but if you want to really have a full power of graphics in FireMonkey, you should be using effect components. So different components, there are more than 60 GPU powered effect components, and also float animation components. So right now if I compile this application, I should see that my sun is now ascending, and there is a little bit of a glow effect around the sun. So it may be a little bit more difficult to show it not on the mobile device, but also in this chapter I'm covering using touch, multi-touch, and gestures. So really you want to be able to handle things like touch. So this last I won't be able to do it with a mouse, because it's how you can rotate this sun with an interactive gesture. So yeah, that's how the chapter 4 is structured, but similar approach is taken to in the chapter 5, not chapter 6. Let me close this for a moment. In chapter 5 we are again showing similar abstractions, but in 3D. So like we have been drawing a sun in code. Now what we are doing, we are drawing the 3D cube in code. So again, like in 2D FireMonkey, we have a canvas, which is a basic abstraction to do cross-platform coding. In 3D FireMonkey, we have a T-context, context 3D class that abstracts away a 3D context, and this is a quite sophisticated class with that abstracts away the different 3D APIs. So if we compile our application on Windows, that would be using DirectX, and the same code using compiled for Mac would be using OpenGL. On mobile platforms we would be using OpenGL ES, but we have just the same set of methods. So here we have a application that after 1 second shows us the cube, which is just a 3D cube, but we don't want to do it in code. We can similarly, like we can use shapes. Here we can use 3D components, and this is a stroke cube component. So right now we don't have any code to write. We just can use 3D components, and there are many 3D components in FireMonkey. There is an example of a custom component here, which is a wireframe component. So that's something could be useful in your projects, that you can just in here we have a pyramid. So in code we can just create a wireframe component at certain points, certain edges, and it will just be an interactive component that arbitrary wireframe. But probably one of the most interesting ones are those the moving earth component, the moving earth demo. So that's the demo that demonstrates how you can create a really nice looking visualization. So we have a example of a 3D user interface, which can be it's 3D and but also uses interactivity. So when the end user touches the earth that is rotating, it goes back and forth. So this is a very simple example of how you can use components like T-dummy component, sphere components, texture components, and some animations. So we have here a texture that you can edit. So that's a texture that we put on top of the sphere, and it's now let me go back to Delphi. So if we touch this sphere, which is a control, it has a sphere earth click, so that we can do an animation, but not with components, but also in code. So there are also other demos here, like Arrows 3D, that shows how you can build an 3D visualization of arbitrary scene. So here we have a code which is like a boilerplate code for how you can have the illusion of moving an object in the space. So here, what I call it here is a stick, the camera on the stick. So in fact, what we are doing here, we have a camera component, and it is parented to a dummy component, and we are this camera is in a certain distance from the origin of this scene, like z-10. So when we are moving this dummy component, which is the central point of our scene, then at the end we are moving the camera on the stick. So the model itself stays in one place, but what we are doing, we can just rotate different elements. So this approach is explained carefully in the book. So basically this means changing the position, the rotation angle along the z-axis and along the y-axis. and also how to do it that it works across mobile and desktop platforms. So we have a gesture that also is responsible for zooming in and out the scene. Also, another interesting demo that actually is using the same approach for manipulating the 3D object is using a 3D the model 3D component that allows us to import arbitrary 3D model. So here we have an example of a helmet. So if we go to this URL, copy, I can go to I have a virtual machine, and it's that's better. I can quickly jump into this URL to show you this model. So you can download a 3D model created in this case in Blender and export it to OBJ file format, and you can take these 3D graphics, and here we see how you can use the same manipulation code, but this time to display something that is more complex than just a cylinder or some basic shape. So if we run this application, we can see the medieval helmet that we can manipulate in 3D. So again, there are many demos in this particular chapter. The last chapter goes into the styles. I'm not going to go too deep because it is really one demo that you can see style test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's really different stages of building the same demo and adding more styling to your application. So here we can see how you can use custom styles to change the look and feel of your application, but also we are going a little bit deeper, and we can also change the built-in style. So we can see here that the built-in style of this arcdial component has been modified, and you can change the individual components or the whole components. So that's quite a lot. We have also example of using frames. So that's also important thing to understand for building applications, and when you understand how frames are working, it's easier to understand how inherited views works on different to support different form factors. So the last thing that I wanted to show in this super fast tour through different demos is the game of memory demo. So this is the complete application that we are starting to build in the chapter 2, just to build the main structure. So we have a project options, and here we have an certain form. Main form is auto created, but there is also a form that is created not at the application startup but when it's needed. So this is an important thing. We have also main data module when we are using this to host the image list of different images. So these are some of the free flags. So the objective of the game, maybe I'm going to start it, is to as quickly as possible to find out to pair to click on the same image consecutively to remove it from the list. So you can see how bad I am in remembering things, and then if you're good, we have now 17 seconds for the 4 pairs, and here we have the top scores, and we are using some of the skills learned in the previous chapters, like storing data in a documents folder. So we have our top scores is stored in a documents folder. We can clear it, but you can also go again and maybe try with a bigger number, with a bigger number of I'm not going to complete it, but yeah, so basically this application you can there is a it's explained in a very detailed way. So basically the main component that we are using here is a grid layout. So there is a grid layout that we use to display different glyphs from the image list component, and depending when you click, then you can change or remove different elements. And you can see it's not dramatically long. Actually, you can see that the grid layout itself does not have an on-click event. That we are programmatically creating a number of glyphs from the underlying image list, and we assigning the on-glyph click event on the fly, and that's how it works. So this is the main logic. So what's happening when you click on a glyph, and yeah, this is not a very complex game, but it's complete game, and you can have this feeling what it takes to become a developer superhero and to build your own mobile games. So Expert Delphi book has been released in the last days of June this year, 2017. It contains more than 500 pages. I'm super proud that David Intersimoni, David I, was kind enough to write a foreword to this book. So it is available from Pack Publishing, either as a printed book, or as an ebook. So on this slide you see the link to this book. It's also available from Amazon. So that was the part one of this presentation, and I welcome you to the part two in 2 days, when I'm going to talk about the second part of the book, so the chapters from 7 to 12. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any live questions. Thank you.